Hello, hello, and welcome. I'm Mehran Khalili. We are DiEM25, a radical political movement for Europe. And we're back after an extended break with another series of live discussions with members of our coordinating team and friends of the movement, featuring subversive ideas you won't hear anywhere else. And tonight, we're looking at Germany. Yes, Germany, once considered a pillar of stability in Europe, is now grappling with multiple crises that are reshaping both its domestic politics and its position in the world. Economically, the country's long-standing industrial power is weakening. Energy costs, inflation, and sluggish growth are pushing Germany towards recession. And with that, we're seeing a political shift. Just weeks ago, the far-right AfD party made a historic breakthrough, winning a state election for the first time since the Nazi era. Legacy political parties are in a panic. To add to this, the German government recently reintroduced border controls, directly violating one of the EU's core principles, freedom of movement. This builds on a disturbing drift towards authoritarianism in Germany, as we've covered quite frequently on these shows, most notably in the way that German authorities suppress pro-Palestinian voices at home, including many Jewish ones, while the state continues to back Israel's massacre of Palestinians in Gaza. Meanwhile, a housing crisis is hitting everyday Germans very hard, with rents spiraling and affordable options hard to find. And all this is happening while the German government is spending billions to support the war in Ukraine, raising questions about the country's priorities. So how do we get here? What does this all mean for Europe? And more importantly, as activists, how do we push back against it? Let's dig into these questions with our panel of contributors and figure it all out. It's a massive topic, this, so I probably we're not going to be able to cover it all tonight. We've got the usual suspects, or some of them, here with me. We've got Judith Meyer, Johannes Fehr, Juliana Zita, Karin Dorigo from our German party, Mera25, Eric Edman, our political director, based in Brussels, and two new faces, two new members of our coordinating body here in DiEM25. We've got Caroline Rehrmann, an academic in social psychology and conflict mediation, and a very transcultural individual. She's German-Greek and based in Germany. And we have Noor Hariri, a writer, translator, media presenter. She's Syrian and she's based in Berlin. So welcome to our panel. We've also got you out there. If you've got thoughts, comments, rants, questions, just put them in the YouTube chat and we'll put them to our panel. Some very quick housekeeping before we get started. This is also going out as a podcast. As you may or may not know, just go to your favorite podcasting app and type DiEM25 and you'll find the podcast to get updated. And every time we put up a new one, you'll get it in your podcasting app. Also, please like or subscribe, hit that bell icon in YouTube to stay on top of new things that we put out on YouTube. And with that, I will hand the floor over to Johannes Fehr. Why, Johannes, is Politico saying that Germany is finally emerging from the first stage of economic grief denial? What the hell's going on?
Thank you, Mehran, and nice to be back live on our YouTube channel after the break. Although, of course, the news and the situation that we are speaking about are still not better, probably even worse. I think it's important to speak a bit about, because I think viewers will have many ideas, especially from outside of Germany, about current disastrous foreign policy of the German government towards Israel, towards Ukraine as well. But what's actually happening inside Germany in terms of economic downturn, as Manon just said, is important to note that there's kind of two levels of the economy, right? There's the many, there's the workers, there's the people that actually in Germany have been suffering for years with stagnating wages, with the biggest low-wage sector in Europe. So that's an important factor that has been around for more than 20 years after the reforms of the so-called social democratic party of the early 2000s. And now the people that actually own the economy, that run the economy, also facing an economic downturn, and now it makes the news, right? I think the reasons for that are chronic underinvestment into our infrastructure. I think the spending policy of the German government, you will remember it from the Euro crisis as well. You keep the euros together. You don't invest in bridges, in streets, into our train system. Like currently, there was a bridge actually falling down in Dresden in the east of Germany as a symbol for that underinvestment, which is now biting our asses, of course. The longer you underinvest, the worse it gets. And I think also the economic downturn has been connected, rightfully so, to the cheap gas that we lost, that is not incoming anymore from Russia. Gas was supposed to be in the state of Germany, where we are about to switch off our coal power plants and also our nuclear power plants, that transition technology, to have a big investment actually into renewables. That investment hasn't been big enough. The cheap gas from Russia is gone by also, as we discussed on this channel, one of the biggest terrorist attacks on civilian infrastructure in the actually in mankind, which hasn't been talked about enough. All this is coming with the inflation crisis, as you, Meran, mentioned already. And I think all these factors together, rightfully so, make people in Germany very angry. And I think there is a big part of the population that are just appalled by the policy of the last years, of the current government, of the previous governments. And now it becomes a bit of an international headline, because also the big companies, because there's no clear kind of path into the future. We are going to invest in electric cars, in renewable energies, into the new industries of tomorrow. The major parties in Germany are run with a lot of money from the current industry that want to keep their business model. So all this made a stagnating model that was good for a few years still for the few, but now also big companies like Volkswagen are struggling. And that, of course, has another significant impact for the many, for the people that are reliant on their wages. And now we have a right-wing turn. And I think this underlying sentiment of anger, which is very understandable, comes together, in my opinion, with the media sphere and the general public opinion sphere run by a few people, either on social media or on the traditional media in Germany, which talks mainly about one problem, which is supposed to be migration. And I think this kind of coming together of the people, of the media, not talking about the real problems, because also, of course, many people that run the media, the political class, they are connected, and they don't have no interest in to talk about the mistakes of the underinvestment, the things going wrong with low wages. So they focus on one topic, and the newcomers into the country are, of course, supposed to be the ones that make it worse, with a lot of people coming in 2015, 16, but the underinvestment being there for years to come. And the current parties, I'm sure we're going to talk about them, the right-wing AfD, the so-called left BSW party that have been gaining in the recent elections, they are making migration also their main topic. So in this media sphere that I've been describing, of course, these parties are rising, and these parties don't necessarily have big answers to the underlying big issues of the country, which is, of course, making a mix that really makes it difficult, but where we have to break through, of course, to talk about the real issues and to talk about solutions to these issues in terms of ownership. Meran has been mentioning the houses. This is really, really important from my point of view. And one thing that I wanted to mention, which comes on top, I think outside viewers have seen, or maybe not, but let me tell you that the AfD, the right-wing parties, is even stronger in the east of the country, the former socialist part of the country of East Germany. while in the West, they're as well present and strong, but not that strong, where the Conservative Party is running the show much more still. So that is because on top of the issues that I was already describing about the last years, in 1990, Germany was reunified, and the East Germany had even bigger issues that were also not talked about, like the economic issues of today. And they, for example, I don't know if many people know, but in the 1990s, 90% of people in East Germany were unemployed at one point. They had really big economic fears, and they have even less investment in terms of the new industry, like an economic basis in that part of the country. And that's because that's why even the anger in that part rightfully is even bigger. And I think, that all gives this mix of the right rising, and that's where we are today. And that's what we're working against.
Thanks, Johannes. Carolina, let me flip over to you. Johannes just mentioned the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, the far-right party that has gained big in these three state elections, which have just concluded. And also he mentioned what he called a so-called left party of Sarah Wagenknecht, who previously was with the left party Die Linke. Who are these guys? To what extent are the AfD really far right / real neo-Nazis? And to what extent, well, why is the Sarah Wagenknecht's party so-called left? And why are they doing so well?
Thank you, Mehran. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of this team. So, yeah, the big question, I think we should all wonder. Johannes was mentioning the reasons of the economic decline. And he was also mentioning the fact that the rise of the far right, of the AfD and the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht is right now happening in East Germany. And he gave some reasons for that, like in deindustrialization, East Germans feeling left behind and particularly worrying about their economic status and integration. So I would say that, first of all, what happened in the East, in Thuringia, in Saxony, and now in Brandenburg, and most of all in Thuringia, where I'm working actually in university, it's nothing short of an earthquake, actually, political, with having a declared right-wing extremist, a fascist party gaining the majority of votes in Thuringia with Björn Höcke. And it is indeed a big question of why is it in the first place in East Germany? So I would say there is some general aspects that Johannes was already mentioning, like the AfD has very successfully gained its constituency in doing what other right-wing parties throughout Europe do, like successfully portraying itself as an anti-immigration party. It was mentioned, it's also a connecting point with Sarah Wagenknecht, the anti-establishment, anti-European, also against the green transition, which is framed as unnecessary and burdening, first and foremost, people in rural areas, people that work in the coal-related depending industries. And so there are some connecting points to Sarah Wagenknecht. For sure, I think you could say that the anti-immigration stance is something where both parties have successfully created a scapegoat for the things that go wrong. But there's also this other point that's particularly, an East German thing. And I don't want to say that, also in West Germany, we have these trends. But what you can say about East Germany is that actually there is this cleavage ever since German unification, where you have economic problems which haven't been overcome in the decades now since reunification. Some people even say you couldn't say reunification; you would have to actually call it the absorption of East Germany into the West. And many East Germans feel disadvantaged economically. They compare themselves to West Germany. Many jobs turned obsolete after German reunification. So there is still a lot of factual economic problems with the industrialization and the outflow from rural areas. But there's also this emotional thing, the feeling that East Germans feel as second-class citizens. If I can say personally, to a certain extent, they are right, because in that feeling, because the West German discourse has been one of, the winner of history. It was the winning economic system. It was the winning political system. And a lot of this resentment, I would say, connects to this, particularly this Eastern German thing. So what does Sarah Wagenknecht do? On the one hand, she criticizes the capitalist, the neoliberal political system, rightly so. But on the other hand, and now I answer your question, Mehran, she is also playing that identity card with having immigrants as the scapegoat and appealing to, that local identity of the simple person that has been left behind by the other parties, and she's the one to represent their interests, which is too short and too simplifying.
Thank you for that, Carolina. Judith, do you agree with what Carolina said? I mean, to what extent is this really that East Germans feeling like second-class citizens, and to what extent are other more identity-related issues at play in these electoral successes?
I actually saw a study, not yet published, but just a fresh study where they told East Germans that like 30% of the country of East Germans feel like second-class citizens, and that caused people to be less likely to vote for AfD, because the impression in East Germany is that like 60% of East Germans feel like second-class citizens. So this is also an appearance issue where the media has communicated the idea that they ought to be feeling as second-class citizens, but some of them may not actually do so. But of course, it's that's just one aspect, and I do believe that the economic issues are key here, and the fear of the unknown, of the foreigner, especially Muslim immigration. In East Germany, there are basically no immigrants, especially not Muslim immigrants. Maybe a few from Eastern Europe, but I checked the percentages of like Muslims in each of these states that voted 30% AfD, and they have like 1%, maybe 1.5% Muslims. And they're definitely afraid. And these are even concentrated in the cities where AfD is not getting votes. So it's more like the media have created this image of something that is to be feared, that will enter your country if you keep voting for the same parties. That is, I believe, the issue. And Wagenknecht has been playing this as well. We have to understand that this may be unfamiliar or unusual for you, but in Germany, we've had pretty much an enlightened discourse until about 10 years ago or so. Even the CDU, the conservatives, were unable to defend having a numerical limit to immigration. Now, this is something that Canada has had forever, right? Just to put a limit to the number of immigrants that Germany would accept. And the CDU under Merkel was not able to vote for this because of our constitution, which is derived from the Declaration of Universal Human Rights, which says asylum is a right and an individual right, meaning that if your limit says 1,000 people, and the 1,001st person comes, they still have the right to apply for asylum because they have an individual right. You cannot just say 1,000 and we don't care what your reason is, you don't get asylum. So that is actually the understanding that we had in this country until like around 10 years ago. And they have chipped away at this. Germany no longer defines itself as a country that that upholds human rights. This was like the saving grace, you know, after the Holocaust, after everything. We were supposed to be the country that places human rights above everything and international law and all that. And that was a standard staple in the German media as well and in conversations. We can't do this because it conflicts with human rights and so on and so on. So, and this has really decreased, especially since the pandemic. It's basically nowhere to be found. I would love someone to do an media analysis on this. Just how often this gets mentioned, in my perception, is completely gone. And that is why we're also seeing this kind of politics, because nobody even spells out what all these new proposals are doing. But sorry, I got sidetracked. Sarah Wagenknecht was one of the people that actually pushed for this new narrative of Germany as a tribe, as a country that doesn't have to observe human rights more than other countries do, and so on. Whatever she said might be mainstream in some parties, especially her the early things that she said when Merkel was still in power. But whatever she said was always at the very edge of what the parliamentary party can say, was always in line with what the AfD was saying. So she was pushing this window to the right. When CDU was saying we can't possibly deny anyone the right to have their request asylum, to have their case examined, she was saying no, there has to be a limit, it's obvious, and so on. And now that everyone has moved to the right on that, and her former position is the new mainstream position, she is going full on against Islam, saying Islam hates you, they don't want to integrate, they're taking your jobs and all this stuff. So they all whatever she says is in line with the AfD and nobody else.
Thanks, Judith. Couple of
and the AfD is still, sorry, the AfD is still more dangerous than Sarah Wagenknecht, because Wagenknecht's underlying narrative is still, we like the foreigners, we want to help them, we want to build up their countries and create situations that they don't have to flee, this kind of thing. Like, while at the same time saying that no, we disagree with the ode to joy, not all men become brothers, we can't be brothers, we can only be neighbors. This kind of anti-woke narrative that she's jumping on, also anti-trans, by the way. But AfD is way worse, because in their private conversations, they're already talking about mass murder, right? They're saying, we now have so many people in this country that a Holocaust would really be worthwhile again. Like this kind of stuff. Okay,
Thanks,
it's internal, it's not official.
I just want to get a couple of comments in from the chat here. Okay, Alex says that the problem is that almost all of my fellow Germans don't speak English. They're therefore dependent on German media. And C. Cole asks, and perhaps Juliana, you can take this. Is there not a legitimate criticism of open border mass migration beyond superficial identity politics? Does it not drive down wages for the working class? Juliana.
Thanks, Mehran. Hi, everyone. So first of all, to the first comment, if you'd like, you can go on our Mera25 YouTube channel, which is in German. And there we did a live stream 2 weeks ago, which was quite long, about the AfD, and we went a bit through their program and discussed really their points in the program, so that people see that we're not just bluntly criticizing them, but we have really reasons to be scared of their politics. To the question, I mean, no, because if you look at the statistics, most of it is blown out of proportion. Also the criminal statistics. And when it comes to taking jobs from the working class, most of them have no working allowance for months, if not years. So it's not like you come in and seek asylum and then you have a work permit to go have some work. And also there is, of course, the lack of language. It's a huge mismanagement when it comes to migration. That is for sure true. but to say it's the migrants' fault and now we have to get rid of the migrants is just where where a common sense person parts from the argument that the AfD is raising. And you don't have to forget that a lot of these people live in an echo chamber. It just recently came out, and it was on a comedy show, that most of the local newspapers in East Germany are not, not official newspapers. It's just the AfD printing something that looks like a local newspaper, and if you look in it, it has kind of, racist narratives. So the same people that go on social media and are in an echo chamber of migrants are bad, this is happening, this and this, now they get a local newspaper which looks serious and tells them the same. So I think misinformation is for sure one of the biggest issue. But I don't think that you can just simply say it's the migrants' fault that somebody has not a job or that wages are low. When in fact there isn't, look at Eastern Europeans and for what wages they worked before we had the minimum wage. These people worked for 2-3 euros per hour, and that was very well tolerated because they used to do jobs which nobody wants to take. So I would answer clearly no to that question. I just wanted to bring in one layer about what has been previously said about also Eastern Germany and the unification of East and West Germany. I think we have to mention that there was a driving force behind all of this, which was the US. And it was more like a geopolitical decision, and nobody cared about the people of Eastern Germany. Let's be honest about that. It was about getting Russian influence out of mid-Europe. And I think that's important to mention. And almost with everything, Germany has followed the path of the US. US and, the people are not very similar, but the policies and the politics of the US and Germany in the last few decades were very similar, where everything was for the market and none of it was for the people in every sector. I mean, we will talk in detail about housing and so on later. But I think if you look at where the money goes to and what they bail out and what they take care of, it's always the industry. It's always making sure that rich people get richer. And now we see just the consequences of that kind of politics for decades. And the big change for me came when Trump was elected. All of these transatlantic, think tanks fell apart because there was no orientation in German politics anymore. It was kind of the big brother couldn't tell you what to do, either in foreign policy or in domestic policy. You kind of looked at the German government fell apart, since Trump came up. And now they're again all shit scared that he comes back again and they will be without a direction to go. This is, at least from my point of view, what's happening when you look at German politics and how incompetent these people show up at their jobs, to be honest. And to, sum up my point, I think that what has to change in terms of politics and what no party can provide out there is really twisting the perception and twisting the priority to I'm doing politics for people and I'm not doing politics for industry, for the weapon industry, for all of these people who really don't need much more money, in my opinion.
Thank you, Juliana. And I think that brings us to the topic of Germany's decision recently to reintroduce border controls, a direct response to the pressure from far-right AfD, which, as has been discussed here, has been tapping into public frustration over migration. Noor Hariri, can you introduce what's going on there? Like how could an EU country, especially Germany, violate the principle of free movement?
Well, yes, Mehran, thank you. As you know, Germany has recently implemented new border control measures, saying it's because of an increase in irregular immigration. These controls affect all of Germany's border, including those with France, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Denmark. But when you look at it closely, it shows how much things are shifting politically, not just in Germany, but all over Europe. Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his party, the SPD, are feeling the pressure, especially with this far-right AfD gaining ground, winning in Thuringia and coming in second in Brandenburg. So it feels like Scholz government is starting to move more to the right, trying to keep voters from drifting away. They've put these border controls in place, and they're acting like it's all about protecting the country and Europe. But honestly, it seems like they're using it as a distraction. They want people to focus on immigration and on border security, making it seem like the big issues are coming from the outside. And meanwhile, they're not addressing the real problems inside Germany. We have so many problems like struggling economy and growing frustration with the politics that's been building up for a while. Inflation has made things more expensive, especially with energy costs going up. And on top of that, there's a political gridlock that's making it hard to get anything done. So I really don't think these new rules are going to solve anything or to solve any migration problems, because migration is a part of a bigger issue that cannot be dealt with in isolation. So instead, these border control measurements might make things actually worse and create more division between migrants and immigrants and non-immigrants. And by focusing so much on border control, the government really risks deepening tensions and making it harder for different groups of people to come together. It's almost like they're saying everything is just fine, everything is okay, and it's just the outsiders, the immigrants, the refugees causing trouble. But that's far from reality. And one big problem everyone's talking about is how actually these border controls are threatening Europe's unity. It's something that the far-right parties have wanted for a long time. And let's not forget how they used to call for countries to leave the EU. They talked about Frexit in France and Dexit in Germany, but those calls have quieted down now. And of course, it's not that they suddenly now love the EU, but now they see a chance maybe to change it, turning it into a collection of strong, independent nations, each pushing its own agenda, its own anti-immigration agenda. So it's not really surprising here to see, for example, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban tweeting and welcoming Germany in this new approach, and saying on X that saying to Scholz that welcome to the club. So at the end of the day, these border controls aren't going to fix Europe's real problems. They're more of a way to make people feel like something is being done about security without actually addressing the deeper issues that are really hurting the country. Instead of focusing on what's happening, what's really going wrong, they're just shifting the blame. And that could lead also to even more tensions and more conflict. So the real question isn't about whether to open or to close the borders. That's a separate issue that needs to be handled in a different context and also in a different way. That's a separate issue. So I think that what's needed here now is an honest leadership that tackles core problems such as the economic struggles, the political disconnect, and we have also this social divide, rather than pointing elsewhere. So until then, I think these quick fixes are only going to put off the real work. And the longer, of course, the wait, I think the harder it will be to bring people together.
Thank you for that, Noor. A couple of comments from the chat. Monica Winkelmann says, I find Sarah Wagenknecht's party considerate and pretty well informed, as well as open and caring for, quote, the poor. Nobody else does this. GP asks, can I please have an answer to this? Why does the AfD have immigrants in their party? Are they against them or not? It doesn't seem to be logical to me. So if anyone wants to take that afterwards, please do. And Elizabeth Rischer asks, isn't Germany bringing in immigrants in order to fill jobs? That's what I've been hearing from France. Karen Dorigo. Perhaps you can tackle that one.
Thank you, Mehran. So Yeah, exactly. This is something that we haven't talked about in depth now, but I would like definitely to keep an eye on that, because the reason why the AfD, BSV are rising so much is that people have fear to be left behind for different reasons, obviously. But this is basically the diagnosis that I have, let's say, read recently, and also one of the most plausible, I think, reasons. Not only in East Germany, not only among immigrants, but among normal people. That's why I think the AfD is getting stronger also in West Germany, honestly, and among people that we would think they are moderate. Because I also, on a personal note, I also start to question the country and ask myself, where are we going? How my future is going to look like economically, job, housing. And exactly these two aspects, I think they are impacting particularly in creating this sense of uncertainty that drives people then obviously towards other people, populists normally, who tries to cuddle them and tell them, don't worry, we are going to make things as they were before. You just have to vote for us. We have right here the simple answer, and the fault is mainly immigrants normally. So we have already explained everything. And this is reassuring psychologically. Nobody can beat that. The left, as we are trying to do all the time, we want to explain thoroughly what happened, why it happened, which is obviously the right and the rational way. But unfortunately, people, especially when they have fear, they react with their guts in the end. So on a note about labor, because it is true, Germany is lacking a lot of skilled labor. Although the unemployment is still always on the same level, it's not zero. There is still unemployment. So the liberal media, let's say, they explain it as a mismatch between skilled people, I mean, the need of skilled people, and these immigrants that come that don't, I don't know, they haven't studied or things like this. But this is totally not true. There is no data, no reason whatsoever to say something like this, but they do. The thing is that companies are struggling right now because of what we said before. So we have a multiplicity of reasons. First of all, high energy costs, the pandemic, higher interest rates. All these three elements have combined in a perfect storm, let's say, so that especially the backbone of German economy, which is the industrial sector, is really entering a decline. And I've been reading right now some newspaper. People are going to work in short terms, Kurzarbeit. So companies are saying we are struggling. Instead of firing people, we will make them work less, so that we are trying to survive like this. And this obviously creates such a level of uncertainty that people are not able anymore to cope with, because to this, there are other crises that they have to face at the same time. Still in this sense, I would like to make two small examples. Volkswagen, that Johannes was mentioning before, they are gonna close probably 2 factories. First time in history in the country of the company, and this is a huge thing because there will be a lot of cuts in the job sector. They haven't managed to transition, to get modernized, to pass to the next level and create enough and good enough electric vehicles. So China is now invading the market even with tariffs, because they are anyway, the cars are better. And this is basically the example of what happened in Germany in the last 20 years, I would say. Intel as well. Intel is an American company, but they had planned to open a a plant of chips because they are chip manufacturer. So they're gonna they wanted to open a plant in Magdeburg in the east of Germany, and now they have postponed it at least for 2 years because of struggles from their side as well. They were supposed to open one also in Poland, to be honest, but obviously for the region now it is a catastrophe because people were hoping for it in terms of job, in terms of investment from the state, who was supposed to put something like 10 billion euro over the years. So all this situation mixed up with a housing crisis, which has become known, I think, everywhere in the world. So just to give you a bit of data to have an idea. In 2023, the rents have risen from up to 9% in the whole Germany in 1 year only. The process to rent a house has become crazy. So especially for single parent with kids, so situations where social housing would be much needed now, there is no protection basically whatsoever. Why? Because the lack of housing, the lack of units is so big. We are missing something like 800,000 apartments right now. The German government was supposed to build 400,000 per year. It managed only to do half of it. So, and Germany is a country of renters, not house owners. So, and even in this sense, even if you want to buy an apartment now with the interest rates that we have, and also all the costs, the additional costs near that, it's impossible. So you cannot afford a house, you cannot afford a rent. And so this kind of insecurity throws literally people in desperation. And it's a perfect environment for populists to say, oh, look, there are so few units, so few houses, and still we have to host so many immigrants. So obviously this is something that they thrive on. But again, I would like to try to answer also to the previous question from my side. Immigration has to be seen also in a let's say in a business way, okay? Let's talk business. So if you want a country to grow because you want to become richer and you want to have a better standard of living, you need to produce more. In order to produce more, you need more workers. Now, as we said before, we are lacking workers. So where are we going to take them? Second, all the people, especially the German population is aging, like everywhere in Europe and around the world. So who is going to pay our rent? Our pensions in the future? So we need really to remember all the time that if we want to achieve some goals, we need specific assets, and immigration is always an asset. If there are not enough houses, it's not the fault of immigrants, it's the fault of the state who has never taken care of that. And first in building, although now the building sector is also destroyed, it's completely frozen because many companies, because of the high costs, cannot finish the projects anymore. So it is really all linked together, but in the end, as we were all saying, the problems is that the politicians do not take responsibility and do not make long-term investments.
Karine, while you have the floor, let me ask you something. Because somebody's just come up with the question here, Matthias. He says, what kind of story has Mera, that's our political party in Germany, to tell for the, quote, plebs of the east of Germany? Or are there only lectures for the deplorables? I'm sorry for the plain English, he says. Now, you've made a very good case, and I would agree with the intellectual argument that you just made about the merits of immigration and the need for it, etc. I completely would. But you also said that when people have fear, they react with their guts. And you did, as we've heard, and from other speakers here, that the media, people have been primed in Germany to be afraid of the other in this period of economic decline. And there's a lot of fear around. So how are you hoping that that argument might resonate? How would a true radical left party reach those people and calm their fears and address their fears? Because the intellectual argument that you've just made, I don't think that's going to resonate with them. So you tell me, I mean, roughly, it's a massive problem. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I would be curious to know your response to Matthias.
Sure. Thank you for the question, by the way. Actually, I really don't have to go too far to bring an example. And I'm also very happy that it's happening in Austria. There is the Communist Party, the KPÖ, that is thriving on politics around the housing. So they have been working on them for decades. Even, I mean, it's really, especially in Wien, it's a historical thing after the Second World War. I mean, obviously, the history is completely different. We cannot really apply the same thing here. But if we go on the streets, we start doing projects. We start to maybe enter, the Senate and the local regions, and start to implement laws that socialize the housing, because this is what we need in the end. I'm sure people will see it. Obviously, it's not going to happen from one day to another, and this, I really hope that it would happen, but it's not going to be so fast. But people need to trust the actions of people that are starting locally. Starting, for example, in Berlin, we had this referendum about Deutsche Wohnen enteignen, so to expropriate apartments, but it's not binding. So until now, nothing has happened. Obviously, they have just forgotten. So okay. I really think that we need to work slowly, but inside the cities, and start creating common projects.
Thank you, Karin. And needless to say, if any of you out there like what you're hearing and would like to be part of the solution, as Matthias is getting at, then dm25.org/join. You can become a member and you can get involved in our political parties in Germany, in Italy, in Greece, and elsewhere. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit here. MSS is asking in the chat, can someone please speak about the 10-year-old child who was arrested in Berlin some days ago? It was shocking to witness this. I think you were referring to the 10-year-old child who was being chased around a square, I think in Berlin, by police for holding a Palestinian flag, for the crime of holding up a Palestinian flag. Is that the right reference that we're talking about here? Yep. Am I right? Okay, good. There wasn't another news story with a 10-year-old child. Just want to make sure I've got the right one. And this brings us to the topic of suppression of pro-Palestinian voices in Germany, something that the German authorities have become very adept at, and something that we've covered multiple times, as I've said before, on these live streams. So Johannes, can you comment on that story and let us know sort of what's been happening in the last couple of months on that front as things tragically continue in Palestine, Israel's bombardment of Palestine, and now, as we've seen, sadly, Lebanon too.
Thank you, Mehran. Yeah, another blind spot in the German media, by the way, also. So has been commented in the chat, people that are just informed in German media don't know much about war crimes going on in the Palestinian territories currently and in the last months. One short comment that I also wanted to make about someone called Giulio that asked about our strategy, and I just wanted to lose basically a few words on that, which is that I think our task as a radical leftist party, which we are also, by the way, in Germany, where mera25.de, if you want to get involved, what our task is to have not the populist scapegoat of the migrant being the problem. We have to face the real problem, which are the oligarchs, the few, the people that actually are very rich, also in Germany, where the two richest people have as much wealth as the poorer half of the population, right? That's where we need to direct the anger to, and both the anger of the workers living in the countryside, the migrants coming, and I think that's also our strategy, to build this unification, or to use this as a unification model without being divided into this false scapegoats that I was talking about before. And talking about this, also, of course, the media runs a campaign against Palestinian people in Germany, because they are basically they're completely equalized as Palestinian people are Hamas. That's basically the main story in the major German media, which is, of course, a huge mistake and a huge racist narrative that has been followed. And that also makes it possible with the German riot police, and especially, unfortunately, the Berlin police is particularly bad, having scenes like that. And the 10-year-old boy were, of course, the so-called highlight of the last days of their police brutality towards protesters that just want peace, that want an end to weapon deliveries from Germany to Israel and an end to the genocide, as we are also demanding as Matter 25. And I think it's no wonder if you know, for example, that the German mayor, a conservative politician, is someone that recently said that there is no genocide and that he had hoped that we were better in learning from our history, meaning we should support a genocide nowadays, which is, of course, in his twisted mind different. But that's all no kind of surprise if you know that this mayor, for example, also has a past to be an admin and a moderator of right-wing Facebook groups before he became more prominently known in the Conservative Party. And this is also something that people have to know about the Conservative Party and the governing parties as well in Germany. They are already implementing right-wing policies. We have been speaking about the border controls. They're basically already the AfD now in some talk shows sometimes accuses them of taking away their so-called good ideas, right? So that's the situation we're living in. And unfortunately, fortunately, the 10-year-old boy was released afterwards. But of course, it was awful scenes. And that's what we have been also fighting on the streets when we are going out in protest with the many against this kind of development in Germany, which is very worrying, of course.
Thank you, Johannes. Judith, bring you back in. Something you want to say on that?
Yeah, just a quick point. This, I believe that this focus on Palestinians or generally Muslims being anti-Semites, that's the accusation, right? They're natural anti-Semites. They are taught, they have textbooks that make them anti-Semites, or maybe just growing up in that region makes them anti-Semites. This leads to a narrative where anti-Semitism has to be imported to Germany. That's what they're saying, imported anti-Semitism. And that is supposed to be like the huge problem in Germany right now. You can't imagine. I mean, as a non-German, how would you imagine that anti-Semitism has to be imported to Germany? It doesn't make sense. And in fact, the police only prosecutes anti-Semitism when it comes from a Muslim or a leftist group. We had a case recently, like a few months ago, of the vice president of Bavaria. He was found to have spread leaflets in his youth, which are really, really, really anti-Semitic, like fantasies about who can kill the most Jews and like a competition about who can kill the most Jews, like strong stuff. And, you know, he's still vice president of Bavaria and his party has gained in the polls. So anti-Semitism is not the issue. The problem is that they want to find a reason to arrest any Muslim they can see, to arrest any leftist they can see on the suspicion that they might be anti-Semitic, when we all know where the real anti-Semitism is.
Thank you, Judith. According to what I've read, Germany is the second largest supplier of arms to Israel. Is that right? My God. Okay. Insane. Okay. Let's move to Eric. Eric, what does all this imply for Germany's role in the world, for the example that Germany's setting, and also from an economic standpoint? Is Germany going to bring the rest of Europe down with it?
Yeah, that is the question, Mehran. It's, by the way, I just want to add this interesting fact because you just said how Germany is the second largest arms exporter to Israel. They're also the second largest arms exporter to Ukraine, right after the United States in terms of absolute numbers. In terms of GDP, they're 11th, so they're not doing as much as they could. In fact, Ukraine is an interesting case in terms of Germany's foreign policy. Maybe we can dip into that. But yeah, that is the question. When Germany, I think somebody very interestingly said in the chat that when Germany is having a bad time, the rest of us should start getting worried. And the first time Germany was having a bad time in recent history was in the economic crisis of 2008. And the rest of us started getting very, very worried. Personally, I'm someone who got introduced into political activism through the economic crisis. I was in the streets in Athens, right, in the squares and so on. And we cut our teeth in our opposition to German policy, both in terms of economics, but also in terms of how they dealt with the European Union. I think when historians will look back at Germany's legacy after the unification of Germany, so after the end of the Cold War, they will essentially attribute to Germany the role of dooming the European Union. And it's very unfortunate. Many of us, and it's important to say this, although we were opposed to the German government's policy, some of the best allies we ever made while fighting those fights were people from Germany itself. This isn't a question of the German people versus any other kind of European or indeed people from anywhere in the world. It's really a question of the German government's policy. And the German government's policy has been one, unfortunately, of extreme short-sightedness in the last few decades and hubris. And what I mean by that is essentially they thought that the good times, financially good times, were going to last forever, and that a steady as she goes approach would be good enough to keep Germany sailing forward, whether it is the black zero, so no debt as part of the German budget approach to financing the German state and the Germans, the expenditure of the German state, or its approach to the European Union, an absolutely iron-gloved stance when it came to European, what's the word, to any kind of progress in terms of the European project. I'll remind you that a few years ago, there was an open question to where the European Union was heading. It was a project. It wasn't an finished institution. Now, a few years after the conclusion, let's call it, of the financial crisis, as we understood it at the time, we obviously never went away. There is no question of what the European Union is going. It's nobody talks about the European Union. It's been killed as a project. And it's unfortunate because Germany needed the European Union. All of its policies in terms of foreign affairs on the one hand, but also in terms of finance and industry, were based on a strong Europe, a strong European common market, and a strong euro. All of the policies that Germany's pursued in the last few years have essentially laid the groundwork that ensured that all of these projects were going to fail. And we are seeing them fail today, whether it is the common market, the euro, or indeed Europe's place as a regional geopolitical actor. And why did it do that? It did that because it was afraid of the short-term hits that Germany would have to take in order to create the foundation for a sustainable European Union, essentially stronger political integration within Europe. So we had policies that centralized the economy of the EU on the German economy, right? That's what we saw from 2008 onwards, indeed even before then, without having any of the political unity to go with that economic sort of centralization around the German economy. So what happened was centrifugal forces that broke states away from the idea of a common Europe and of Germany as the flagship of that common Europe. And now that the economy that was meant to be at the foundation of the European project has foundered, right? With what we're seeing since especially the war in Ukraine, the increase in gas prices, cutting off gas from Russia, and the rest of them, we're going to go into it. The driving power for Europe's economy, namely Germany, had no backup because it cut off all those backups with those very short-sighted policies that only benefited Germany in the short term without giving it any kind of sustainability into the future. So this hubris in combination with short-sightedness essentially doomed the one project that could have ensured a continuation through bumpy times for the European economy, and of course also for the German economy, and also for German society. You know, a closer integration, a better sort of sharing of the burdens of the kind of vibrations that you get from economic hits, from socio-political hits, whether that is immigration or whatever else have you. All of these things that right now are bringing Germany to its knees because Germany has no one to properly share the weight of those issues with. That situation is essentially the creation of Germany itself. Europe as it is today is Germany's creation. So in many ways, Germany has no one but its own government to blame for the kind of situation that it's in today, and not having the kind of structures in place that would allow for any kind of maneuvering from the position it's in. One last point very quickly, because we haven't touched on this. Germany has been very shy in terms of throwing around its weight in terms of foreign affairs, right? That's largely also because of the heritage of its history. So, you know, what Germany does beyond its borders is a bit of a thorny issue, and rightly so. However, the rest of Europe was held hostage by Germany's inability to find a way forward in terms of how it's dealt this catastrophic approach to Israel's genocide in Gaza and Palestine in general, its inability to find a stance on Ukraine, seesawing between supporting Ukraine, not supporting Ukraine, fully backing NATO, not for complete inconsistency when it comes to its foreign policy there. And obviously that also spills over into NATO, where Germany has no real defense to speak of, and completely depends as a result to NATO, making it essentially a puppet to NATO's interests around the world, and dragging Europe and the European Union, I should say, not Europe, the European Union, along with it, because of that stance and the kind of weight that Germany has in the EU. So it is indeed usually a forerunner of really hard times for the rest of the continent as well, when Germany is struggling. And I would say that this case is not an exception either.
Thank you, Eric. Normally it's nice to end on a positive note, but
you came to the wrong guy, man.
Yes, but no, I mean, it's absolutely true, everything you're saying. And thank you for all your contributions, guys. That was really good. We're at the top of the hour. We need to close it. We have covered Germany's economic shit show. We've covered the far right party and the left conservative parties that are gaining ground fast there. We've talked about border controls, pro-Palestinian suppression, German foreign policy, and the implications for the rest of the world. We did not get to a ton of topics that we wanted to get to, like the war in Ukraine, the housing crisis, and lots of other things that you guys have been putting out there in the chat. So I'm sorry for that, but we have to keep this to 1 hour. We did our best. We will do more of these. Guys, if you would like to join DiEM25, if you like what you've heard, you can become a member just by going to diem25.org/join. If you'd like to donate to DiEM25 to keep us going, we have no sponsors, no big backers. I'm not going to insert an ad right now for some, I don't know, hygiene product or something. We depend on small donors like you to keep us going. So please go to diem25.org/donate. If you've got feedback on this, if there's something else you'd like to see, if you think the format of the show needs to be rejigged, or you'd like something else, or like us to take a different direction, then please just put your feedback in the comments below. And also don't forget to hit the bell icon to keep in touch with us on YouTube and find out whenever we post something new. So thank you again to my panel. Thank you again to you out there. And we will see you at the same time